I still remember in primary school, we'd line up for the 100 metre sprint at the athletics carnival, and every single time I'd think to myself, there is no chance I'm going to win this. The race would start and I would give it everything I had, yet all the other boys would speed right ahead and I'd always come around third or second to last. The funny thing is, winning didn't really matter to me that much, or getting a ribbon or anything like that. But what I did notice was the way that people saw the winners. The fastest boys, they'd be admired and respected. Everyone seemed to love them. It's interesting because in those early years, with these moments, among others, like seeing men on TV save the day or doing something outrageously heroic, I started to gain this notion of what it meant to be a man of value. That masculinity meant being athletic and strong and tough, being the leader and being charismatic and just being in control of everything. At that time, I kind of felt like if a man had any breakdown in emotion or showed any sense of vulnerability, all of these qualities would dissipate. And on paper, I wasn't any of those things. I threw a few tantrums when I was younger, I wasn't a leader in school, and I certainly wasn't the most athletic. So I did what most boys would do. I compensated. I thought I'd have the characteristics I had that weren't very masculine, but I would show this image that I was unaffected and nothing would get to me. And this image of masculinity would look different for everyone depending on how they grew up, who was in their lives, and who they looked up to. But no matter what form this image takes, one thing always seemed to be true, that there is no room for weakness. By the way, this wasn't an image I strived to uphold because I was concerned about how other people would view me or how they would judge me. It was an image that I upheld to convince myself that I was a certain type of human being. It was an image where when I looked at myself and if I felt that I ever fell short of a certain expectation of who I wanted to be, it just felt silly. And as a result, it was easier to stay silent. So how do we break that silence? That's something I've been thinking about a lot, especially when it comes to supporting boys speak up early before that silence becomes entrenched. I sat down with Haseeb, a junior doctor from Perth and co-founder of Man Up, an organisation that conducts peer-to-peer workshops and engages young boys and men to discuss masculinity across topics such as culture, healthy relationships and mental health. So I'm curious to know what the story behind it is, how it all started.
Man Up started back in 2020 and started after a conversation between myself and Gareth, who was one of my very good friends at the time and one of the co-founders of the organisation. We looked into what kind of behaviours we showed in the local communities that we functioned in, what kind of relationships we had with close women in our lives, what kind of opinions we had about the way that the world functioned. It seemed to be at the age of 15 to 16 when boys are young enough that their ideas are still mouldable, but they're old enough that they understand some of the concepts about how society works and why it's important to be active in calling out behaviours that are negative and developing positive new behaviours. Some kind of education or educational program needs to happen within that time period. And the conclusion seemed to be that small group workshops was the way to tackle this, and having them run in a peer-to-peer fashion. So this is young men talking to young men with only about one volunteer or facilitator to 10 students, and discussing topics that really are quite vital to the development of a young man at that time.
Peer-to-peer workshops like what Man Up does are so important because it's about young people speaking to young people. It creates a space where boys can relate to each other and speak about their opinions and experiences openly. I'm sitting in one of these sessions. What does that look like? You know, how long do they take? How much didactic components are there versus, opportunities for the boys to talk about their own experiences?
Yeah, very little is didactic. It's very little done as like a teacher talking to students. It's very much more of a conversation. Essentially introduce ourselves to a big group of young boys at a school or at a local community or at a after school hours workshop or at a youth club. We've also done youth juvenile detention centres here in WA as well, spoken in rural communities, at sporting clubs, so a variety of environments to find young men at. introduce ourselves, break off the groups. We try and keep people with their friends. It normally makes people have an easier time talking about what they're uncomfortable with. And also, if they're around their friends, they're more comfortable showing their behaviours that might need to be challenged or discussed or called in or called out.
This kind of companionship is important. As I moved through my adolescent years, I realised that the thing I feared the most wasn't this struggle to uphold the image of being strong and tough and charismatic. What I really feared most was that if I didn't convey these characteristics, I would miss out on the things that mattered to me the most. Being supported, being loved, and just having genuine companionship. This got me thinking. Many people are wondering what boys are missing out on these days, particularly those who feel disconnected or feel as though they're not living up to a certain standard. And as a result, these boys might seek answers and spaces and ideologies that aren't particularly healthy. So I asked Haseeb what a lot of us are thinking. What is that thing that boys feel like they're missing out on these days? I thought that Haseeb had an elegant way of responding to this.
I don't think it's what's missing from their lives that means they engage with negative role models. I actually think it's probably what has happened in their life. I don't think those people are missing things. I don't think they've got too much or something. I think just different people's backgrounds, their course, the people that they've engaged with, some of the philosophies they've developed through stories that they've heard, or the way that media has been presented to them is why they believe that. I think if we take the average young man, I would like to have the hope that most of them have just had certain patterns of behavior and certain occurrences and certain engagements that have led them to just thinking differently to what we engage with as healthy masculinity in our lives. And I think the best way to really tackle that is to just acknowledge and address what some of those things might be.
So it's experience we should focus on, not what's missing. Because if we constantly ask, what are these boys missing? Then we might be missing out on an opportunity to support them in a genuine way. If we focus on their experiences and show them a curiosity about what they're living through, then we can demonstrate to them that we hear them and we care about how they feel. And with this sense of curiosity and the focus on their experiences, we can also role model to them to listen to those around them. So in this sense, boys and young men aren't people to be fixed. They're people to be understood. So how do we build a culture where boys feel heard and not shut down? It starts by listening to their experiences and then guiding them from there. And by guiding them, we're not saying that masculinity is a problem. Instead, we can take the language of masculinity that we already know and then give it new meaning. Because for me, masculinity hasn't always been harmful. It's inspired me to stay resilient when times get tough, to stick up for other people around me and to fight for what's right. But most importantly, it's how we define those qualities that matters.
And I guess that's also where our name comes from, is using the phrase man up, redefining it to mean to embrace a healthier version of masculinity to you.
So, reframing is important. Being strong can mean finding the strength to take a leap of faith, to connect with others and be honest. Being courageous doesn't mean hiding from the pain, but leaning into vulnerability and facing it. And being a leader can mean showing the people around you the value of opening up and asking others for help. It's all about changing the meaning of the language we already know. It's about redefining masculinity from one that pressures boys and young men into silence and into one that encourages a space for openness and honesty, and one that embraces vulnerability.
If you're struggling, talk about it, be vulnerable. You're never going to be judged for that. And I think the culture towards young men being vulnerable is changing. And engage with the female voices in your life, recognize why and what they're feeling, and take some onus about what you can do about it to your extent. It doesn't mean that you should take all the burden in the world, but if you can talk to one person in your life that you are quite confident has a pattern of behavior or a belief that you want to challenge, and you can discuss with them, and they'll listen to you because they're a young man, that's a step forward.
I'm going to read this little piece to you that I wrote in my journal about the thoughts I had during the race and how that connects to the theme of masculinity. Those athletics carnivals as a kid, it was a time for us to earn our worth, prove our strength, our speed, and to conquer the respect of our peers. It's funny to think that a couple of decades later, I've decided to run 8 half marathons. I see running races a lot differently than I did back then. This half marathon, while I'm running, it feels like such a massive distance. Yet, if I zoomed out and looked at just how vast the Earth is, the 21.1k is just a tiny stretch of ground beneath my feet. A reminder that with every step I take, even as I slowly grew tired and pushed through the discomfort of catching my breath, the world wasn't mine to conquer. Instead, it just felt good to stay present. It just felt good to run, and to run with this community on the other side of the country, sharing this activity that we know and love. Masculinity isn't about dominance or power or achieving a high status. It's about being grounded and present and strong enough to listen, knowing that the world is too large to conquer. It's about being resilient enough to feel tough emotions and brave enough to stick with the discomfort. Because you can't outrun vulnerability and you can't outpace emotion. Masculinity isn't about running from those things, but running with them and supporting others to do the same. I didn't finish this race to prove something, to show off my pace or my athletic ability. I finished it to remind myself that masculinity isn't about conquering the world around me, but instead it's about staying present with my emotions and my vulnerability and encouraging myself to seek the support of the people around me. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'm Nick, a provisional psychologist from Melbourne. In 2025, I'm running 8 half marathons across Australia's 8 states and territories in the 8 months leading up to Movember. Along the way, I'm sharing my personal story and the work being done across the country, all while raising funds for Movember. For those of you who've donated so far, thank you so much. It really means a lot. I'm doing this because every story is different and every story is just as important. And together, we can go the distance, one conversation at a time.